I don't know about you guys, but I am such a bookworm. I love a rainy day and getting cozy with a new book. I even love the smell of books. And of course, mystery or thrillers are my go to, but finding the time to sit down and actually read them, that's the real mystery. So, as much as I love the feel and smell of a good page turner, I also love Audible. You can listen to thousands of audiobooks, podcasts, and originals while doing literally anything. And the best part, your entire library goes with you. True crime, paranormal deep dives, thrillers, memoirs, whatever your brain may be craving, Audible probably has it. Start listening today by grabbing your free Audible trial through the link in my show notes. With an Audible membership, you get 1 credit every month to download any audiobook you want to keep for free. Plus, unlimited listening to thousands of podcasts and Audible originals with Audible Standard. So, whether you're driving, cleaning, walking the dog, cooking dinner, or spiraling down a late night true crime rabbit hole again, your next story can go with you. Start a free trial today, download the Audible app, and begin listening in minutes. Just check the link in my show notes to get started. Your next obsession is waiting. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is Suspects and Spirits, and I'm your host, Taylor Seraphin. It is time for part 2. And if you know this story, then you know it's not gonna get any better, aside from him getting caught. So listener discretion is still very much advised for this part. This is going to be a quick, very short intro today. Not a whole lot of updates or housekeeping for you, other than the usual. Subscribe, rate, review, share the pod, all that good stuff. Merch is still up. The Stay Salty merch will be coming down within like a week or two. And then I'll probably be adding a summer collection or just, a hot weather collection, spooky hot weather collection, because it's sweaty season, but mentally I'm in spooky season always. So head over to suspectsandspirits.com for some merch. Tell a friend about the pod, repost, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But we got a lot to cover. So now let's get into part 2. When we left off in part 1, Ed had just committed his 6th murder. And now we are going to get into his final 4. At this time, as we know, Ed was back living with his mother, and this was adding a lot of fuel to the fire. After disposing of Cindy's body and burying her head in his mother's garden, weeks had gone by, and Ed was growing more and more irritated by his mother, Clarnell. And in February of 1973, after a heated argument with his mother, Kemper left his house in search of possible victims. But now, there was a growing suspicion of a serial killer preying on hitchhikers in the Santa Cruz area. Students had been advised to accept rides only from cars with university stickers on them. Authorities and parents were doing everything they possibly could to keep young women safe. But there was only one flaw in their plan. And that is the fact that they hadn't considered this to be someone who had inside access to college campuses. So, of course, knowing that this was now a requirement for young women because it was all over the news and all anybody could talk about, Kemper knew that these girls would be looking for decals on cars. And he was able to obtain a sticker of his own. Because remember, his mother worked at UCSC. And unfortunately, this plan of his succeeded. Because on February 5th, 1973, Kemper would encounter 2 young women on the UCSC campus looking for rides. This was a separate encounter. The girls were not together, which likely made the second young woman more enticed to enter the car. Seeing another student in the car with this man who had a university decal, a parking pass, probably made her feel like this was a safe choice. These 2 young women were 23-year-old Rosalind Thorpe and 20-year-old Alice Helen Allison Liu. According to Kemper, he first encountered Thorpe as she exited a building, having just attended a lecture. Thorpe was walking along when he offered her a ride, and of course, seeing his sticker, his parking pass, she agreed, and was thankful even. She entered the front passenger seat, and believing Kemper to be a fellow student, the 2 began chatting amiably as he drove off. Shortly after this, though, Kemper then noticed another young woman, and that was Alice Liu. So, of course, Kemper decided to stop his vehicle, and Liu, again, seeing his sticker and being thankful for the ride, entered the back seat of his car. I would like to point out how rare this is. especially for a serial killer. Double murders are relatively uncommon among them because they introduce unpredictability. Controlling one victim is difficult enough. Controlling two creates additional variables and increases the likelihood that something will probably go wrong. So, this is where he is now escalating. He'd done it before, his very first time, in fact. Well, that we know of at least. And it had proven pretty easy for him due to his size. But most organized offenders prefer situations they can completely control because they are control freaks after all, and not in a good way. Kemper, however, was becoming increasingly confident in his abilities. And I mean, he had every reason to be because he hadn't been caught. And there were plenty of opportunities where that could have happened. So, using a campus parking permit that belonged to his mother, he had gained access to the university grounds and drove onto campus, where those two sweet, unassuming girls accepted a ride. And what happened next illustrates just how bold he had become. Shortly after picking these girls up, Kemper this time did not drive them to a secluded location. Instead, this happened on campus. Again, very bold of him to do this. Anyone could have seen or heard what was happening, but unfortunately, they didn't. So, after stopping the car before arriving to their destinations, he again got out his 22 caliber pistol and took full control. Kemper first aimed the gun at Thorpe and shot her in the head. And then he turned the gun on Lou. Kemper shot at her twice, but she was putting up a fight, which caused him to miss both times. And now, overcome with rage, he fired again. And that third shot struck her directly in her temple. Then, as the two young women lay dying in his vehicle, Kemper put away his gun and began to drive. According to Ed, in order to get off campus, he had to drive past the campus security gates. So before he did, he covered Thorpe and Lou with a blanket. And then he drove right past the campus security without a care in the world. And of course, this act itself seemed to provide him with a sense of excitement. When he talks about it in interviews, you can see the smug look on his stupid face. He knew he was carrying out evidence of a murder right past those security guards, yet no one suspected him. Again. And once he got off campus, he then followed the same ritual he had with the previous murders. Kemper then brought Thorpe and Lou's bodies back to his mother's house. However, this time, he didn't take them inside first and dismember them in her basement or in her bathtub or anywhere else inside the house. He ended up beheading them in the car. In his car, he did this, which again shows you just how fucking composed and confident he was that he wouldn't get caught. Apparently, he wasn't worried about neighbors seeing him do this, and his car, I mean, it wasn't huge. And remember, it's a two-door Ford Galaxy, right? He's a giant. I imagine his car was rocking around as he decapitated these women. He's freaking huge. I can't even dance to music in my car without it wobbling. So I can only imagine one, the mess, and two, the amount of movement happening here. But somehow he got away with it. No one saw him. And after he had decapitated these women in his car, he then carried their headless corpses into his mother's house to once again engage in necrophilia. And after pleasuring himself and deciding that they had served their purpose because he was a piece of fucking trash, he then went on to dismember their bodies. And just as he did before, he removed the bullets to prevent identification and then discarded their remains the next morning. This time, though, he did not keep the heads. He understood that he had been seen on campus by campus security and that that is the last place these women had been. And if anyone had seen him giving them a ride, he knew they may put two and two together and come look for him. So he didn't want any evidence at his home. Instead, he drove out to the California coast at Devil's Slide in Pacifica, and he threw their heads and hands into the ocean. He later returned to the scene to dispose of their bags and other personal belongings to avoid any connection with their disappearance and murders. Thankfully, some of their remains were found at Eden Canyon about a week later, and more were found near Route 1 nearly a month later in March. And like all of the women before them, Rosalind Thorpe and Alice Liu were far more than just names attached to this serial killer's timeline. Rosalind was described by people who knew her as very intelligent, very bright, super well liked. She was nearing the completion of her studies in linguistics and psychology, and she had just this wonderful demeanor about her. Everyone liked her. Alice Liu had originally hoped to become a teacher before developing a very strong interest in political science and humanitarian work. And according to her father, she had become really passionate about helping impoverished communities and collecting donations for those in need. They had such bright futures ahead of them, and it makes me really sad. Like, we can't lose the humanity within the story. And it's just really devastating that this was erased for all of these women for every case. But by now, after the disappearance of Rosalind Thorpe and Alice Liu, law enforcement was beginning to piece together a very disturbing pattern. Body parts were being discovered, victims were connected to local colleges and universities, young women were disappearing under very suspicious circumstances. Investigators realized that they were likely dealing with a serial killer. And the media, of course, eventually gave the unknown offender a name: the co-ed killer. So, as you can imagine, fear was spreading rapidly through the community. Students became increasingly cautious. Parents were worried about their daughters. Residents knew someone was targeting young women and connected it to local campuses, but they had no idea who it was. And meanwhile, Kemper just continued living an almost normal life. He still socialized. He still frequented bars like the jury room, which was, the local police favorite. He still talked with police officers, and no one suspected that this friendly giant they knew as Big Ed was the very man responsible for the terror gripping the community. So, as investigators recovered remains, another aspect of Kemper's crimes became even clearer, and that was his obsession with decapitation. Investigators were very curious as to why this was such a big part of his crimes. And later, after his capture, when asked why he removed the victims' heads, Kemper offered an explanation that was both, I guess you could say, revealing and also very disturbing. To him, the head represented the essence of a person. The brain, eyes, mouth, and face were all located there, and the head was where the identity existed. The rest of the body, in his mind, was just secondary, which is so dehumanizing. He said later in an interview, quote, the head is where everything is at. The brain, the eyes, the mouth, that's the person. I remember being told as a kid, you cut off the head and the body dies. The body is nothing after the head is cut off. Well, that's not quite true. With a girl, there's a lot left in the girl's body without the head. Of course, the personality is gone. End quote. So I don't know about you guys, but that quote is horrifying to me, not only because of what he says, but because of how, like, clinically he says it. And by that stage, the women are no longer human beings in his mind. They had become just objects, collections of parts, trophies attached to fantasy. And that explanation also reflects how detached he had become from the humanity of his victims. He spoke about bodies almost mechanically as just collections rather than human beings. Some investigators and psychologists went even further. Dr. Joel Fort, who studied Kemper extensively, suggested that there may have been elements of cannibalistic behavior involved in some of the crimes. And while Kemper openly admitted many very disturbing details throughout his interviews, he never confirmed these allegations. I guess he did, and then he recanted because he used to like to shock people in his interviews. But what is beyond dispute is that Kemper kept extensive souvenirs. He photographed and mutilated bodies. He retained body parts. He kept their heads. He revisited memories of the crimes repeatedly. And with every successful murder, his confidence and his sense of invincibility continued to grow. And by early 1973, the investigation into the co-ed killer was intensifying, but not because law enforcement was closing in on Kemper. In reality, he was still flying almost completely under the radar. Ironically, though, that event would ultimately set the final chapter of the story in motion. By March of 1973, after the remains of Thorpe and Liu had been discovered, Ed was growing quite restless. He didn't know what to do with himself. Despite the fact that the police had no idea he was a serial killer, he had become pretty much convinced that they were closing in on him, and he knew he couldn't continue this forever. Now, whether this stemmed from actual paranoia, anxiety, or some lingering aspect of his earlier psychiatric diagnosis, it's difficult to know. But what is very clear is now Kemper had come to a realization, and he talks about this a lot in his interviews. All this rage and resentment that he held toward women had an origin. Ed claimed that the only way he could stop killing innocent girls was to deal with the root source of his rage, his mother. So, on Good Friday, April 20th, 1973, Kemper finally acted on the fantasy he had carried with him since childhood. According to Kemper, he was awakened on this night by his mother. Clarnell had come home from a party and was being a little bit noisy, and then she went to her bedroom and got settled into her bed with a book. And while she was sitting there reading, she noticed Ed enter the room. He later recalled that she looked up at him and said something along the lines of, "Well, I suppose you're going to want to sit up all night and talk now." To which he replied, "No, good night." And then he left the room. But this interaction was enough to send Ed over the edge because a short time later, after Clarnell had fallen asleep, he returned to her room carrying a claw hammer and a penknife. His mother was fast asleep when he began striking her repeatedly with the claw hammer and eventually slitting her throat with a penknife. This was by far one of the most brutal acts of violence Ed had conducted, and what followed was even worse. Kemper, as he had done with all of the other victims, began to decapitate Clarnell and then went on with the dismemberment of her body. And as he dismembered her, he removed her tongue and her larynx. The larynx, if you don't know, it's part of the throat containing the vocal cords. And he placed both of these in the garbage disposal. Now, later on, Ed would explain that he did this because he obviously hated her voice. He was angry about her voice, the way it sounded. He couldn't stand it. And just all of the things that she had said to him throughout his life. This was a way to destroy her voice. However, according to him, the garbage disposal could not break down the tough vocal cords and ejected the tissue back into the sink. To which he said, quote, "That seemed appropriate as much as she'd bitched and screamed and yelled at me over so many years." End quote. So clearly, he had some feelings about that. And again, listening to his interviews, I can't with him sometimes. He's so fucking smug and he knows he's smart and he knows he's charming and he tries to make little jokes here and there. And I just want to punch him. I do. But unfortunately, the violence did not end there because this is Ed we're talking about. So after dismembering her body, Kemper stuck to his same ritual and used his mother's severed head for sexual purposes. His own mother. I don't even know what to do with that information. But Ed, he described this as an act of final humiliation, a way of exerting ultimate dominance over the woman he had blamed for so many of his problems. I mean, he probably could have just moved out and not killed a bunch of innocent women, but what do I know? So, after killing his mother, after killing Clarnell, Kemper later admitted that not only did he use her head for pleasure, he also set it on a shelf and screamed at it for hours. He just screamed at her severed head and then used it as a dartboard, stating that he ultimately, quote, "smashed her face in," end quote. So my God, that reveals something deeper than rage alone, I would say. For him to feel as though he couldn't stand up to his mother or talk back to her until she was dead, even as a grown fucking man. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, clearly, but this is a level I just will never be able to understand. And what's weird is that even when discussing her years later, Kemper occasionally spoke about his mother with a really surprising complexity. So in one interview, he described her as a quote, "sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman," end quote. But then again, in other interviews, he actually begins to cry when speaking about his mother. Like he's tearing up, he's choking up, and it's just a lot to process. This guy is an interesting character. I really highly recommend you go watch those interviews because my fucking God. So, whether he truly believed this was about revenge is debatable at best. Listening to his interviews, it becomes really clear that the fantasy itself had likely existed for years. Now, after doing all of this, killing his mother, humiliating her corpse, he hid portions of her remains in the closet and began planning his next move. He knew someone would eventually come looking for her because she had friends, she had other children, like someone was bound to figure out that something was up. And one of those people was her very close friend, 59-year-old Sally Hallett. Her name was Sarah Taylor Hallett, but she went by Sally. So rather than risk Sally discovering this crime he had committed, Kemper instead invited his mother's best friend over to the house to have dinner and watch a movie. But as you can imagine, they never got to the dinner and movie part of the evening because when Hallett arrived, Kemper strangled her to death. He then put Hallett's corpse in a closet as well, obscured any outward signs of a disturbance, and then he left a note to the police. It read, quote, approximately 5:15 a.m., Saturday. No need for her to suffer anymore at the hands of this horrible, murderous butcher. It was quick, asleep, the way I wanted it. Not sloppy and incomplete, gents. Just a lack of time. I got things to do! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. End quote. So that is chilling. He is something. So afterward, Kemper, he fled the scene. He drove nonstop to Pueblo, Colorado, taking caffeine pills to stay awake for the 1,000-mile journey. He had 3 guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition in his car, and he believed he was the target of an active manhunt. But after some time went by, after not hearing any news on the radio about the murders of his mother and Sally Hallett when arriving in Pueblo, he then did something that no one would have expected. Ed found a phone booth and he called the police. And during this phone call, he actually confessed to the murders of his mother and Sally Hallett. But the police did not take his call seriously and they told him to call back at a later time. I wish I was fucking joking. Just so we're clear, guys, if someone's ever like, hey, I committed this murder, I killed someone, you should probably just like believe them. You know, maybe overreact. Just believe them, just in case they're not fucking with you. Because I don't know a lot of people who would say that they murdered somebody if they actually didn't. Like that's not a funny joke to me. So I would say maybe believe them. But because they didn't, several hours later, Kemper called again, asking to speak to an officer that he knew personally. And that is when he confessed to that officer of killing his mother and her best friend, Sally. And this time, this officer listened. So now, Ed was just waiting for the police to arrive and take him into custody. And upon his capture, Kemper then also confessed to the murders of Marianne Pesce, Anita Luchessa, Aiko Koo, Cindy Shaw, Rosalind Thorpe, and Alice Liu. He was the co-ed killer. And initially, again, officers did not take him seriously. The idea that Big Ed, the friendly giant who drank with local cops, could be responsible for the co-ed murder seemed absolutely absurd. But Kemper persisted. He provided details, he explained where evidence could be found, and law enforcement began verifying the information he provided. Ed Kemper was even asked by police to provide a handwriting sample by copying the note he left at his mother's and her friend Sally Hallett's murder scene, which ended up, of course, being an exact match. And the police were shocked, to say the least. Their flabbers were gasted because everything he had told them was true. This friendly giant that they thought they knew was, in fact, the co-ed killer. And once they got Kemper into custody, he was remarkably cooperative. He confessed extensively. He describes the murders down to every little detail and he explained his methods. He answered questions with a level of detail that investigators rarely receive from serial killers. Because while serial killers can be narcissistic and pompous little assholes, they're not talkative necessarily. Ed Kemper does not shut the fuck up. That guy, again, will talk your ear off. There was one quote that actually really stood out to me that terrified me because these police officers always viewed him as just like silly, silly Ed. He's a big ol' Ed. And when FBI profiler Robert Ressler interviewed Kemper, Kemper reportedly said, quote, "If I went apeshit in here, you'd be in a lot of trouble, wouldn't you?" End quote. What? Like he's just being interviewed by an FBI profiler and he says that shit? That's terrifying. Because when you look at the interviews and you really watch his body language, his demeanor, he is so chill. He does not have a worry in the fucking world. And Wrestler, that profiler, later realized the panic button in the room wasn't working when he was interviewing Kemper. And this is one of the many, many reasons that FBI agents consider Kemper unusually self-aware and intimidating because of shit like that. It just like sent chills down my spine when he said that. I hated it. One thing people ask me all the time is how I make my podcast merch, and I always, always, always send them over to Printful. In fact, I've officially partnered with them because they do such an incredible job. Seriously, you guys, they are such a game changer. It's so easy, I could do it. Printful is a print-on-demand site where you design your merch exactly the way you want it, and they create it for you when someone clicks that purchase button. So you're not stuck storing boxes upon boxes of shirts, hats, stickers, or random inventory in your house. The best part is that you can link your Printful creations directly to your very own website. I just design what I want and they take care of the rest. They print it, pack it, and ship it for me. And you can set your own prices. And the merch options, endless. The limit does not exist. We're talking everything from cozy sweaters to phone cases and even adorable pet accessories for your furry little friends. They'll love it. So if you've ever wanted to start a side hustle or just bring a creative idea to life and slap it on a t-shirt or a good old dad hat, this is hands down the easiest way to do it without the stress. Head over to printful.com/a/suspects to let them know I sent you and get that creative juice a-flowing. The link is in the show notes to get started. Again, that's printful.com/a/suspects to let them know I sent you. Sometimes staring at screens all day can make your eyes feel like they are actually on fire. And let's face it, in today's world, a lot of what we do requires staring at a screen, which is already horrible for your eyes. I actually went to the eye doctor recently and he was like, "Wow, I didn't think it was possible, but your vision has gotten worse." Rude, but true. So, of course, he started asking me all the normal questions about headaches and screen time, like I'm a toddler whose parents don't monitor how many episodes of Bluey they consume. And I'm explaining my daily life, lesson planning, entering grades, researching cases, recording episodes, editing episodes, dog videos, more dog videos. And he's like, Yeah, you need a new prescription and you should probably invest in some blue light blocker glasses." Now, since I am a contact lens girly and always have been, I did not want to pay the extra price for blue light glasses that I would never wear. So I did what we all do. I went to Amazon, and that's where I found Any Love blue light glasses, which have really helped me on my not wanting my eyes to feel like they're on fire journey. In fact, I'm wearing them right now. So if your eyeballs are also filing a formal complaint and possibly your eye doctor too, head to my link in the show notes and grab yourself some Any Love glasses. They have tons of different styles for men and women. They're honestly super cute and they even come with a nice little case. Save your eyes some stress and go grab a pair, or two, or five, because your eyeballs deserve it. So, in total, Kemper had admitted responsibility for 8 murders. The 6 young women, his mother, and Sally Hallett. And then there was, of course, the murders of his grandparents, bringing that to a total of 10. Some investigators have very long suspected the true number might be higher. Just, given the escalation of his violence, the confidence he displayed, and the amount of time he spent hunting for victims. It's difficult to rule out the possibility that additional crimes occurred. He's also so chatty. and so comfortable with everybody that it's hard to tell. Still, though, the official count remained 8 murder victims during his serial killing spree between May of 1972 and April of 1973. In addition, of course, to the earlier murders of his grandparents. Kemper was then indicted on 8 counts of first-degree murder on May 7, 1973. He was assigned Chief Public Defender of Santa Cruz County Attorney Jim Jackson. But due to Kemper's very explicit and detailed confession, his counsel's only option was to plead not guilty by reason of insanity to the charges, which we see a lot in these cases. Now, Kemper, he did attempt suicide twice, allegedly, while in custody, but failed, obviously, and his trial went ahead on October 23rd, 1973. And let me be very, very clear when I say that 3 court-appointed psychiatrists found Kemper to be legally sane. They said he is completely self-aware. He knew exactly what the fuck he was doing. He is not insane. One of the psychiatrists, Dr. Joel Ford, investigated his juvenile records and the diagnosis that he was once psychotic. Remember, he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. Ford then also interviewed Kemper using a truth serum called pentothal and relayed to the court that Kemper had engaged in cannibalism, alleging that he sliced flesh from the legs of his victims, then cooked and consumed these strips of flesh in a casserole. However, Ford also determined that Kemper was fully cognizant in each case and stated that Kemper enjoyed the prospect of the infamy associated with being labeled a murderer. And then Kemper, like I said before, because I mentioned this earlier, he later recanted the confession of cannibalism. So according to him, that wasn't true. And I mean, he's a big guy. Did they give him enough of that truth serum to make sure he was under the influence of its properties? I don't know. He's very large, so he could have been fucking with them because he does like to do that. Like I said, he loves the shock value. He's just such a little shit. I hate him. Now, because all this happened in California, they used the Manhattan Standard, which held that for a defendant to, quote, establish a defense on the grounds of insanity, it must be clearly proved that at the time of committing the act, the party accused was laboring under such a defect of reason from disease of mind to know the nature and quality of the act he was doing, or if he did know it, that he did not know what he was doing was wrong, end quote. Now, when you take that into consideration, Kemper, he appeared to have known the nature of his acts was wrong because he showed signs of malice aforethought. So this was all murder one. He knew exactly what he was doing, but you get a serial killer with an IQ of 146 and you never know what kind of shit they're going to pull. They're going to try to manipulate everything. But because he had planned all of this out, that didn't work so well for Big Ed. So on November 1st, Kemper took the stand and he testified that he killed the victims because he wanted them, quote, for myself, like possessions, end quote, and attempted to convince the jury that he was insane based on the reasoning that his actions could have been committed only by someone with an abhorrent mind. He stated that 2 beings inhabited his body and that when the killer personality took over, it was, quote, kind of like blacking out, end quote. Sorry. It's not funny. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard from such a smart guy. No, just no. You're now contradicting yourself, my dude. You're saying it was like blacking out, yet you remember every little detail of what you did to these young women? Shut up. So after that, on November 8th, 1973, the 6-man, 6-woman jury deliberated for 5 hours, just 5 hours, before declaring Kemper sane and guilty on all counts. Snaps for them, good job, jury, because his confessions alone left very, very little room for doubt. One particularly memorable moment occurred when the judge asked Kemper what punishment he believed he deserved, and Kemper responded that he should be tortured to death. I mean, right back to childhood. He wants to play gas chamber again. What a fucking... It's just irritating because he knows. He knows that they can't do that. So now he's fucking with the judge because he knows that there's a moratorium placed on the capital punishment by the Supreme Court of California. So again, he's just saying it like for shock factor to be a shithead. But I mean, unfortunately, since they couldn't torture him to death, he instead received 7 years to life for each count. So 56 years to life because there were 8 murders. And these terms were to be served concurrently. And so he was sentenced to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. Shortly after arriving there in 1973, Kemper was admitted to psychiatrists for reevaluation, and he was re-diagnosed with antisocial, narcissistic, and schizotypal personality disorders. Now, I find that last one really interesting. I'm not a doctor, so this is just like my personal opinion. Antisocial, narcissistic, absolutely. I believe he falls under that category. Schizotypal, though, uh, gives me some pause. So this is also known as STPD or SPD, not sensory processing disorder. That's a different SPD, but it is a mental disorder, and it's characterized by thought disorder, paranoia. It can be a characteristic form of social anxiety, derealization, psychosis, and it's just hard for me because usually with these types of people who have this personality disorder, and obviously that's not their fault, but they feel a pronounced discomfort in forming and maintaining social connections with other people, primarily due to the belief that other people harbor negative thoughts and views about them. But Ed was like overly talkative and confident with people. It's just weird because the DSM-5 classifies STPD as a personality disorder belonging to cluster A, which is a grouping of personality disorders exhibiting traits as like odd and eccentric behavior. And sure, he was an odd guy. Could he be eccentric? Absolutely. But I don't know. This one just like doesn't sit right with me. Again, not a doctor. This is just my personal opinion. You can disagree all you want. But in the latest edition, which is the ICD-11, schizotypal disorder is not classified as a personality disorder, but a psychotic disorder. People with this usually have like really severe social anxiety and paranoid ideation. His paranoid ideation did not happen until his very last murders when he thought that, people were going to find him because his mom was dead. People with STPD also have usually, I should say, have a very limited sense of self awareness. And Ed is so self aware. Hold on, now I'm curious. Now I got to Google. So it says that they can have difficulties in memory and may have frequent intrusive memories of events. It's common for people with SPTD to feel deja vu. Oh, guys, I might have STPD. They are more likely to believe in supernatural phenomena and entities. Yeah, so I guess I have it, guys. I must have this. Anyways, I have a lot of opinions about this, and I'm sure you guys don't want to hear me ramble about personality disorders. So let's get back on track. Unlike some notorious killers of this era, he has remained behind bars ever since. He was not put to death. He's still alive. And many profilers do believe that the young women Kemper targeted were never truly the end goal in the first place. In their view, the co-eds were just substitutes. And the real target was the obsession that had existed since childhood, his mother, because that's really where it all ended. And FBI profilers and psychologists would later describe Clarnell as Kemper's, quote, great white whale, because, the women he murdered, they represented a very displaced rage. And he did realize that this was more about humiliation, rejection, and resentment that he associated with his mother. So that theory becomes especially difficult to ignore when you look at what happened after he finally killed her. He himself said that after her murder, quote, the original purpose was gone, end quote. So, that's telling. That is why I'm always so interested to know, like, what is it in the human brain that causes this disconnect? I've said it before and I'll keep saying it over and over again. I know plenty of people who've had shit parents. They've been given a horrible start to life, who turn their life around. They're wonderful people, wonderful parents to their own children. I just don't know there has to be something in the brain chemically that causes this to happen. It can't just be nurture. There's got to be a combination there. And what's really interesting in this case in particular is that decades later, behavioral experts and FBI profilers, they revisited Kemper's interviews, and they made some really fascinating observations. Most of them didn't believe he came across as deceptive in any way, which I agree with. He seems, if anything, unusually honest. like disgustingly so, because somehow that makes him even more terrifying. And they agreed. The members of the behavioral panel, which are Scott Rouse, Greg Hartley, Chase Hughes, and Mark Bowden, they noted that Kemper rarely behaved like a suspect being interrogated. He behaved more like a professor giving a lecture. Yeah, and he does. He leaned back comfortably in all of his interviews, or he sat up like with a giddy expression on his face, and he used really precise language. He explained psychology. This dude's explaining psychology to people, and he explained motive as though he were the one analyzing another person. He talked like he was a consultant. Behavioral experts also pointed out how often he intellectualized emotion rather than actually expressing it, which is actually really common in people who have ASPD or narcissistic personality disorder, which often go hand in hand. Because instead of saying, I felt devastated, he would describe emotional experiences almost like in a clinical manner, as though he were describing or observing them from outside himself. And despite openly admitting responsibility for murder, he repeatedly redirected conversations back to his mother. So he could say, I killed them. Like, yes, I killed these girls, but then spend the next hour explaining why he believed Clarnell had damaged him psychologically. He was just so obsessed with his mother. And there's a difference between explaining behavior and excusing it. And it's very clear that he wasn't explaining why he had done it. He was trying to excuse what he had done. And according to many profilers, Kemper constantly drifted toward justification without explicitly saying it outright. He would allude to the fact that this was justified because his mother treated him this way, because his mother made him hate women. Like, no, dude, there's no fucking excuse for what you did at all. You can't justify it. And what's even scarier to me is throughout all of these observations in these interviews, Kemper was the most frightening when he was calm. I remember, like, I wrote that down in my notes, and then the behavioral panel said the same thing. They were like, it's scary, how calm he can be when discussing all of this. Like, I don't even want to know what he would look like angry. I almost can't even picture it. But being 6'9" and almost 300 pounds, I don't think it would take much to scare anyone, to be honest. I really believe that worked greatly to his advantage. Now, John Douglas, who I'm actually kind of excited to talk about, he is a former FBI agent and the agency's original Mindhunter. So if you've seen the show, that's like where they got the idea from. I used some of his books. They're in my show notes. If you want to go read them, they're really good. He was the pioneer of criminal profiling. He conducted groundbreaking face-to-face interviews with Ed Kemper in the 70s and in the 80s. And Douglas used these conversations to establish foundational profiling frameworks such as, manipulation, domination, and control. So throughout all of that, all of the interviews, he described Kemper, this very experienced profiler, said that Kemper was intelligent, friendly, open, and surprisingly likable during interviews. The behavior panel, which I just talked about, Scott Rouse, Greg Hartley, Chase Hughes, and Mark Bowden, which you guys, I think you've heard me talk about them in the suitcase murder, in the Melanie McGuire case. They pointed out that, when you look at Ed, you expect to see a monster. You expect to see this wide-eyed, crazed individual. Based on what he did, you expect to see somebody more Manson-like. But instead, they see someone who could be a teacher, a librarian, a professor, just a neighbor. And that's what creates the discomfort there. And I'm just paraphrasing here, but their overall assessment was that Kemper doesn't seem proud of the murders. He seems proud of understanding them. He appears really fascinated by his own psychology. He likes explaining what happened. He likes hearing himself talk. He likes being viewed as insightful. He likes being the smartest person in the room. So the danger is that listeners start admiring his self-awareness and they forget they're listening to someone who murdered 10 people, which is probably what happened when he was a teenager, because they really thought he was rehabilitated. The behavioral panel said, quote, Ed Kemper rarely comes across as a raving madman. He comes across as the guy explaining the raving madman. And that's what makes watching him so unsettling. He doesn't seem like he's reliving the murders. He seems like he's giving a lecture about them. End quote. 100% agree. He was extremely narcissistic, and the behavioral panel clocked that immediately. They were like, this guy is not a paranoid schizophrenic. They also noted that he doesn't use like the typical deception tactics. He doesn't come across deceptive at all. And he answers questions voluntarily. Like he can't wait to talk. He cannot shut up. And of course, life in prison proved strangely familiar for Kemper because just as he had thrived at Atascadero State Hospital when he was 15, he became known as a model prisoner. Staff members generally found him very cooperative and well behaved. And one notable relationship involved, and I talked about this a little bit in part one, I just like hinted at it. So he was very well known for his relationship with serial killer Herbert Mullen. He really hated Herbert Mullen. He disliked him very intensely. And the reason is just so surreal because according to Kemper, Mullen was a quote, cold blooded killer, end quote. It's not funny. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because it's fucking ridiculous. He was like, Mullen was a cold blooded killer who murdered people without reason. So are you. Oh my God, he's infuriating. But I guess in his mind, he had a reason, like his reason was his mom or whatever, because he thought it was justified. When I tell you, I could just punch him. I mean, how annoying, right? So the irony there is very strong. Here was a man who had murdered college students, his grandparents, his mother's best friend, and his own mother, and had done horrific things to their bodies postmortem. Now criticizing another killer for lacking justification. Are you fucking kidding me? So, of course, he's projecting, right? But the most insane thing to me about Ed Kemper, other than just him, right? He's wild, is that every time he was incarcerated, he was given some kind of important job. Because years later, you guys, Kemper became very well known for another reason, other than being a piece of shit. Are you sitting down right now? Because you should. Have a seat. So, Kemper and his very unique, soothing voice, because remember, he had like this deep, soothing voice. People thought it was very calming. He spent thousands of hours recording audiobooks for the blind while in prison. A horrendous necrophilic murderer. They were just like, hey, Ed, you have a really nice voice. Would you mind recording these audiobooks for us, please? I mean, I know prisoners have to have jobs like within the system. Why is this one of those? Why? Get Samuel L. Jackson to do it. Get Morgan Freeman. Like, there's so many other people you could get to do this for a good cause. And it wasn't just like one or two books. You guys, by some estimates, he narrated more than 700 titles and accumulated over 5,000 hours of recorded work. While serving his life sentence, Ed Kemper became one of the most prolific participants in a prison program, that's a mouthful, called The Blind Project at the California Medical Facility. He literally spent thousands of hours recording audiobooks and textbooks for the blind and visually impaired readers. Reports from the program state that he narrated hundreds of books and recorded more than 4 million feet of tape. It just really irritates my spirit a lot. I don't like it at all. Some of the books attributed to him include, are you ready? Flowers in the Attic. Can you fucking imagine? Oh my God. The Rosary Murders. Yes. God Emperor of Dune. And Star Wars. Mm-hmm. Yep. And of course, these recordings were generally made for blind reader library programs rather than like commercial audiobook markets we think of today, but still a questionable choice because what the fuck do you mean? One of America's most notorious serial killers spent decades helping blind people access books. What? And that's honestly one of the reasons that Mindhunter portrayed him as such a compelling interview subject because his intelligence and conversational style were part of what made him so scary. And Cameron Britton, who portrayed him, did such an incredible job really capturing the essence of that character. Because, I mean, obviously, Dahmer is scary in his own way. Bundy is scary in his own way. BTK annoys the shit out of me. But he's also scary in his own way because he had a whole ass family and was living a completely normal life. But none of them behaved like Ed Kemper. He is an anomaly. And countless people may have listened to those books narrated by him without realizing that the voice reading to them belonged to one of America's most horrible humans. But like I said, today Kemper remains incarcerated. He is still at that same California medical facility serving his life sentence. He was last denied parole in 2024 and is next eligible to appear before the board in 2031. And that, my twisted friends, is the case of Edmund Kemper III, the co-ed killer. I highly recommend you go check out some of his interviews if you have not seen them. It's really unsettling how calm and charming he is. Just from like a psychological standpoint, it's interesting to watch. But what is far more interesting than that pile of human shit is the fun fact that I have for you because we gotta cleanse the palate. This one is not about urine, so don't worry. No. This one is that the ancient Greeks invented the first vending machine. You guys, I know, around 2,000 years ago, you put a coin in, and guess what came out? Holy water. I'm not even joking. Humans invented vending machines and immediately used them for religion. Apparently, it was designed in the first century CE by Hero of Alexandria, also known as Heron. He was a brilliant Greek mathematician and engineer. It was a device built for temples in Alexandria to stop worshippers from taking more holy water than they actually paid for, because God forbid we be protected by the Holy Spirit. They would drop a coin into a slot at the top of the machine. The lever system was a coin that landed on a small metal pan attached to a delicately balanced lever. And the weight of the coin would tilt the lever, which opened a valve connected to a reservoir, allowing a specific amount of holy water to flow out. And then eventually, the coin would slide off the pan, causing a counterweight to drop. And this would shut off the valves, stopping the flow of the water until the next coin was inserted. So, yep, there you have it. That's your fun fact. Could you imagine, though, if your house was being haunted back then or your friend got possessed? All you're trying to do is get some holy water and they're like, sorry, you got to pay. God gave me this idea so we could turn a profit off his premium sanctified moisture. I just want to know, why? Were people bathing themselves in holy water? How much holy water were they taking that this was necessary? They always try to make money. I want to know though if they still have this contraption. Do people still use this somewhere? You just walk up somewhere and there's a big old sign that says Lord's Gatorade, holy water, now with 30% more salvation. Anyways, I have way too much fun with my free will. Don't ever put me in charge of naming things. Lord's Gatorade, 100% is what I will be calling holy water from now on. Alrighty. Well, you guys, that is all I have for you today. Thanks for coming back for part 2. Make sure to leave a review, share, and follow the podcast. The pod is on Instagram at Suspects and Spirits Podcast. You can also follow on Facebook and TikTok. And don't forget to send in your stories for June Booze Clues. Send them to me. I want to hear them. I want to read them. And yeah, I think that's it. We'll be back next week with a good old paranormal episode for you. And it's a fun one. In the meantime, though, be good humans. And as always, remember to trust your lizard brain. Until next time, goodbye.